If you've got an Xbox adaptive controller, like the one I have in my hand here, and you've been wondering how you can connect analog joysticks to that, you're not alone. So there's a couple ways that you can do it. You can use the USB connectors on each side and use standard USB joysticks to accommodate the analog thumbstick capability. Those are kind of expensive, or they can be, so we're going to see if we can't get one of the SJJX joysticks to work with the Xbox adaptive controller. So in this video, we're going to see if we can get it to work and see if it might be a practical, cheap solution for some of you out there. My name is Preston. Welcome to Enabled. These are all the things that you need to complete this project. So you need an analog joystick, of course. This is the SJJX joystick. It comes exactly as shown. We do not need this cable that's in the side, so we can just pull that off and toss it aside. It also comes with the ball. So we got a ball. This is a green color, it looks like. It's got the little cover and the shaft cover also, so that all comes together with the joystick. Then we need something to put it in, so I've got a plastic project box that I purchased. You could also make one yourself if you want to make one out of wood, something like this. I built this box for a different joystick that I haven't completed yet, but it's a simple box made out of wood and it's glued together, so that's also an option. We need a TRRS 3.5mm jack. We need an adapter cable. So this is going to plug into our joystick right here. And then we need a TRRS male on both ends. So this is what's going to connect our joystick to our Xbox adaptive controller. And that should be it. A few hand tools, and you should be able to put this together pretty easily. So let's get to it. The first thing we want to do is drill our mounting holes inside of our project box for both mounting the joystick and also mounting the 3.5mm jack. So the joystick is going to go on the top side where the lid is, and the jack is going to go, I believe, on this side. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the lid from this project box, which is just removing these 4 screws. And I'm going to remove this mounting plate from the joystick by removing these 4 screws. And that will allow us to take this mounting plate and use as a template for our holes on our project box. Now that we have the lid removed from the project box, you can see that inside of it there is a weather seal. So if you wanted this to be weather tight, you could use this seal and seal around the lid. I don't really care about being watertight, so we're just going to throw that in the trash. And we also have the joystick plate removed. Now this box is not quite big enough to mount the joystick. This was a cheap project box that I found on Amazon. I didn't want it too big because it just gets unwieldy for these little joysticks. So this one isn't quite big enough. The plate will not fit down inside of the box, nor will it fit down inside of the lid because of these corners that are on the inside. And these corners are only for the gasket sealing, so they're not really important. So there's a few things that we could do. Number one, if we were building our own box out of wood, we could make this a custom size to whatever we needed to fit our joystick. The other thing that we could do is cut these corners out. So you could Dremel it out, or you could use a little saw or a file, and you could cut these corners out to allow that plate to fit in there correctly. I am not going to do any of those. What I'm going to do is just mount the plate to the top of the box, like so, and I'm going to use the 4 mounting screws that we removed earlier to mount the plate to the joystick, which will be on the bottom side of the lid. So the holes that I require to mount this thing, I need the center hole for the joystick shaft, and I need these 4 holes that I can screw down into the top of the joystick. Now this is a little bit uglier. It doesn't matter for me. I don't really care what it looks like. But if you did want it to be pretty, a little more professional look, then I would recommend removing the corners from the inside of the box, and then you'll be able to mount the plate on the inside like it's supposed to be. If you're going to do that method, you won't use the 4 holes that I'm going to use. You will want to use these other mounting holes on the ends. So you'll just drill holes here, and then you'll put bolts down through, and then you will put nuts on the bottom side of the lid. So depending on how you want your box to look is completely up to you, but the end result will be very similar. Alright, so what I've done here is I took the joystick plate and I centered it on the lid as best as I could. So I did take a couple measurements on each side and tried to get it as centered as I could. It's certainly not perfect, but it's close enough, I think. Then I'm going to take a drill bit that is the same size as the current holes that I'm going to mount to. So this is a 13/64 drill bit because I'm in America and we unfortunately haven't switched to the metric system yet. But all you need is a drill bit that's close to the hole size that you want to mount this thing in. I'm just going to take this drill bit and I'm going to, with my fingers, rotate it a little bit in each one of these holes. And what that's going to do is automatically find the center of each hole so that I can come back later and drill with a smaller drill bit. So I'm not drilling a hole or anything. All I'm doing is scratching the surface a little bit to identify where the center of each hole is. And then for the joystick shaft hole in the middle, I'm just going to take a marker and I'm going to mark around that entire thing so that I know where the outside edges are. Once I've got that done, I can go ahead and unclamp the plate from the lid, and I can remove this. And I'm sure you can't see it in the video very well, but I can see where my mark is, and I can faintly see where my hole centers are. So now I'm going to go ahead and drill out my screw holes, and then I'll show you how we're going to find the center of our big circle. I have my mounting holes drilled. I used an 11/64 drill bit. That size doesn't have to be the exact size, just has to be larger than what your mounting screw is. And the 11/64 drill bit is quite a bit bigger than that. These screws will fall right down in the hole, which is exactly what we're looking for. So the next thing we need to do is drill the center hole. And to find the center of that hole, all I did, I measured the diameter of the hole in the plate, which is about 1.18 inches. I don't know what that is in millimeters. And then I drew a circle in PowerPoint or something close to it that is 1.18 inches in diameter. and then I just drew a cross hatch that centers the circle in each way, and that gives me a target center for my center drill point. So I'm just going to take this and I'm going to lay it down on my box where I marked that blue circle before. I'm going to move it around until I get it about where the outline of that circle was, and then I'm going to tape it in place. I'm using blue tape because that's what I could find. And this doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. It is, the closer you get it to the center, the nicer it'll look and the more range of the joystick you'll have. But we're going to drill a pretty good size hole in here anyway. So even if it isn't perfectly centered, it's still not going to limit the travel of our joystick. So I'm going to use a 1 1/4 inch bit to drill this hole. This is actually larger than what it really needs to be. I think 1 1/8 would be more appropriate, but I can't find my 1 1/8 bit, so I'm going to use 1 1/4. And I'm just going to use the target in the center of my circle as my center point. I'm going to drill this out, and then we're getting close to being finished. Now that we've got the center hole in there, we're ready to go ahead and mount our joystick. So I took the blue protective covering off of the mounting plate. You want to make sure, if you mount it like what I'm doing here, you want to make sure that the countersinks are pointing up. So we just need to lay our plate down there. It should be aligned with our mounting holes. And then we want to put our joystick underneath. And then we want to stick our screws through and screw it down to the joystick. Now, I would start your screws loose at first, just get them started. And then when everything's started and lined up, you can go back and tighten them down. And it should pretty much center itself where it needs to be on these countersunk screws. So now that we've got all the screws started, we can go ahead and start tightening them. They don't have to be super tight. Just snug will be just fine. If you tighten them too much, it'll strip that plastic out because they're just threaded into plastic. So don't get carried away. And there you have it. Now we have our joystick mounted to our lid, and it should fit down inside of the box. Looking pretty good. We don't want to close the lid up yet though, because now we need to take the base of the box and we need to drill a hole in here for our 3.5 millimeter jack. So for this hole, we're going to use an 1/8 inch drill bit, at least for the jack that I have. You can get different kinds of jacks on Amazon that I think are a little bit larger. So if you were to use one of those, you would have to use the right size of drill bit. But for the one I have, it's an 1/8 inch mounting hole. And all we want to do, it really doesn't matter, honestly, where you put it. I would recommend putting it down towards the bottom, as close as you can get it. And I think if you centered it in the box, you know, this direction, if you centered it here, I think it would look nice, but there's no reason that you couldn't offset it if you wanted to. There would be a little bit more room probably on the outside edges, because your joystick wouldn't be in the way. So if you tried to center it in the box, you're going to be hitting around this area here, but I think that this is going to set up high enough that the jack will be underneath this joystick anyway. So I'll go ahead and center it down towards the bottom, but in the center. And if it doesn't work for me, then you guys know better to put it off center. So let me go ahead and drill that hole and we'll see what it looks like. I got the hole drilled in the center. I don't know what I was thinking. It is definitely not an 1/8 inch mounting hole. It's supposed to be a 1/4 inch mounting hole, but that was pretty small also, so I ended up drilling it out with a drill bit I, which is a lettered drill bit. And that's a good fit. It's a good tight fit. So the jack will fit in there just like that, and then we'll put this nut on there. And there's not a lot of threads sticking out, and that's what I was afraid of whenever I did this. But I think it's going to be okay. There's enough threads on there that the nut will start, and I think it's going to be just fine. So the next thing we need to do is solder our jack up to our adapter. So we need to figure out which terminals need to be soldered to which wires, and then we'll solder them together. So I need to figure that out, and then I'll come back and we'll get these soldered on there, and then we're pretty much done. All we got to do is install our jack in our box, plug our cables together, and then put our lid with a joystick on it down in our box and try it out. Before I actually solder this jack up, I want to spend just a little bit of time explaining what the wires do and how you figure out what goes to what. So a TRRS cable, which is what we have here and what is needed to connect this joystick to the Xbox adaptive controller, is one that has 4 contacts on it. So you'll see these little white lines. Oftentimes they're black. On this cable they're white, but usually they're black. Could be green, could be red, could be any color really. But those are little insulators. And that insulates 4 different contacts. So the tip is 1 contact. Then you have ring 1, which is contact number 2. Ring 3 is contact number... ring 2 is contact number 3. And then down at the bottom is the 4th contact, and that's the sleeve. So I've already done the research, and I know that the Xbox adaptive controller, the tip is going to be the X-axis. Ring number 1 is going to be the Y-axis. Ring number 2 is going to be ground, and then the very last one, the sleeve, is going to be the reference voltage. So we have to, that's how we're going to have to wire our jack, so that each terminal corresponds to what I just said. Now on our TRRS Jack, you'll see that there's 4 terminals on there. That's because 1 terminal is needed for each one of these contacts on the male end. So again, I already did the research, and I know that the top terminal here, it's kind of hard to get the camera to focus, but there's a terminal on top right here. That corresponds to the sleeve, which is what our voltage needs to be. And then if we look on the other side where the other 3 terminals are, the one on the left is ring 1, which is going to be the y-axis. The one at the top is ring 2, which is going to be the ground, and then the one on the right is the tip, which is going to be the x-axis. So now that we know what these have to be, then we have to correspond that to our joystick. So if we look at our joystick, this is going to be true for any analog joystick that uses potentiometers. So each one of these is a potentiometer. You have one here and you have one here. The reason there are two is because one is needed for the x-axis and the other one is going to be for the y-axis. And if you look at the potentiometers, there are 3 wires attached to them, or 3 terminals. The outside terminals, it doesn't necessarily matter which one. One of those is going to be the ground, and the opposite one is going to be the voltage. Now, on this one, I'm going to assume that the rightmost terminal is ground because it's a black wire, and the leftmost terminal is going to be voltage because it's a red wire. It doesn't really matter, honestly, if you swap them. If you swap them, what that's going to do is instead of, it's going to swap your left and right and your up and down. So in one direction, if you have a ground on the right pin, let's say, and you push up, the joystick may go up. If you have the ground on the opposite side, so the left pin, instead, if you push up, it's actually going to go down. But it doesn't really make any difference because all you have to do is flip the joystick the other direction, and then when you push up, it's going to go up. So having said that, that might be more detail than what's really needed for this video. But for this joystick, we're going to assume that black is ground and the opposite terminal is voltage. So we just have to follow those wires to our connector. So in this case, if you were to follow the black wire coming off of this potentiometer, it is still black. So if you go all the way to this connector, the black wire is ground. So that's good and easy. The other side, it has a red and a yellow wire attached to it. And if you followed those wires, the red wire is actually going to go to the other side, and it's going to connect to this potentiometer. And the yellow wire comes out to the connector. So instead of the red wire like you would think it would be, it's actually the yellow wire that's going to be voltage. So now we have the ground figured out and the voltage figured out. The other 2 wires are going to be the X and Y axes. So that the axes wire is going to be attached to the 3rd pin on each potentiometer. So on this potentiometer, it is a white wire. So that's going to be one of the 2 axes. And then on this potentiometer, it's actually a red wire. If you followed the red wire from this potentiometer all the way down, you'll find that it goes to this connector. So to recap, we have black on this connector is going to be ground, yellow is going to be voltage, the white wire is going to be one axis, and the red wire is going to be the other axis. Now I've connected these before, and if I remember right, this direction, so with the joystick long ways like this is going to be up and down, and this is going to be left and right. So if that's true, then that means our white wire is going to be the x-axis. When I move the joystick left and right, it's this potentiometer that's going to rotate, and this potentiometer is connected to the white wire. So the white wire is going to be the x-axis, and the red wire is going to be the y-axis. So putting all that together will tell you which of these wires should be connected to this jack. Now I have all this written down so I can easily see my diagram on how this is connected. If you need more help, just watch the video a couple more times and it'll make sense. Or if you're using the same equipment as I am, you should be able to wire it up exactly like I do and it should work. Now there's one complication to this, which is very unfortunate. The adapter cable that I have, when I plug it in, the colors are actually the opposite. So you'll see that on the joystick side we have black, white, red, and yellow. But on the connector side it's yellow, white, red, and black. So it's inverted. That's going to make it more difficult for me to keep track of what goes where, but I'm going to do my best to remember. So now, having said that, the yellow is going to be ground. The white and red actually stayed the same color now that I'm looking at it. So that's going to be white is x-axis, red is y-axis, and the black wire is going to be voltage. So I'm going to solder it up that way, and then when I plug it in, that's when we'll know whether or not I'm correct in all of my assumptions. So let me get my soldering gun up here, and we'll solder this up real quick. Alright, if you've never soldered before, this can be intimidating. It certainly was for me when I first started to learn how to solder. I'm going to give you a few pointers. Things I've learned. It's not as hard as it seems. You just got to know how to do it. So what I like to do is hold your soldering iron to your terminal and let that heat up. And then you're going to put solder, not on the soldering iron itself, but you're going to put solder on the terminal that you're heating up. So you're actually heating up the terminal hot enough to melt the solder, and then when it's hot enough to melt the solder is actually going to flow all the way over that terminal. So I'm going to go ahead and pre-solder every one of these terminals using the same method. Okay, so now our 4 terminals are pre-soldered. Now we can take our wire in here, and normally I would pre-solder these as well, but I'm not going to do that this time. I'm just going to stick them on there and see if it'll work. But I am going to put little pieces of heat shrink tubing over my wires, and this will give it a professional look in the end. And it will also kind of keep your solder in place, which we shouldn't be bending these too much anyway once we get it together. But the shrink tubing will kind of hold it all together a little bit better. Okay, so the yellow wire is going to be, what'd I say? Ground. It's going to be ground, which means I need it to connect to this top terminal right here. I don't have enough solder on that one, so I'm going to have to go ahead and pre-solder, bend it in the hook. Then my voltage is going to be black. So that one's going to go on the very top. And I'm just going to hold my soldering iron on top of that wire and press down into the solder. And when the solder melts, it's going to allow that wire to go down inside of it. And then when you pull your iron off, it cools down immediately and becomes hard. Alright, so that leaves my X and Y axes, and I think we said the white wire was the X axis, so that's going to be this guy over here. And the very last one will be on this side. All right, so now we've got all of our wires connected. I'm going to dab a little bit of solder over the top of those. This is really hard to do on the camera because everything's kind of in the way. So I'm just going to put a little bit more solder to make sure I got a good connection. Yeah, that's what I figured. Okay, that's better. Then you just take your shrink tubing and slide over the terminal. Looks like I didn't use big enough shrink tubing. Poor planning on my part. There we are. And then we have to heat that up. So I usually just use a lighter. Like this. Go over to the shrink tubing till it's all shrunk. Okay, not too bad. Could be a little bit better, but it's going to work for our purposes. Once we get it in the box, no one's going to see it anyway. So now, we can get this out of the way. Pull our joystick in here. We're going to plug the cable in that we just soldered. And then we're going to install the jack in our box. And we're going to install the nut on the outside. So I am going to tighten it a little bit with pliers, but I'm not going to get too crazy with it. That should work. And now we're ready to put our joystick into our box. Now I'm not sure if it's supposed to go this way or this way. We're just going to install it one way. And if the joystick's backwards, we're going to have to take it back out and turn it around. I should also mention that this wire here is not needed. Not really sure what that wire's for, but we're just going to tuck it in our box and see what happens. I'm not going to put the screws in it yet. What I want to do is plug this into an Xbox controller and see if our directions are correct. If they are, and it seems like everything's working okay, then we can go ahead and put our 4 screws in. Now the terrifying part. We got to plug it in and see if it works. Before we do that though, I'm going to go ahead and put the joystick top on it. So I'm going to put the round tube down first, and then the joystick cover, shaft cover, and then we'll thread the ball down. Alright, so now it actually looks like a joystick. Then we're going to take our TRRS cable. We're going to plug into our jack that we just installed. We're going to plug the other end into our Xbox adaptive controller. So the left and right thumbsticks on an Xbox controller are going to be the X1 and the X2 plugs on this guy. So I'm just going to plug it into the X1. And I think that's the right one. And then we're going to go to the computer and we're going to open up the Xbox accessories app. You can download that off of Microsoft Windows Store. Alright, we got our Xbox accessories app open on our PC. So if I press one of the buttons, it should show up on the app, and it does. So that's the B button, that's the A button. So the controller is working like it's supposed to. Now what happens if we move our joystick? So if we press it in the up direction, it says it's L down. If we press it down, it says L up. If we press it left, that's L right, and right is L left. So I've got it backwards, which happens to me 100% of the time. Every time I do this, I put these in backwards. It's a 50-50 chance, and I get it wrong every time. So we just pick it up, we rotate it around, put it back in our box. Poke the stubborn wires down in there so it seats properly. Now if we press up, it should go up, down is down, left is left, and right is right. So there we go. Very good. Our joystick is working like we want it to. Fantastic. So not too bad of a project, I don't think. I think it turned out pretty good. Of course, you would need two of these if you wanted to operate the other thumbstick, and then that would go into X2. Alright, so all that's left to do is to put our 4 screws in and start gaming. Another way we can test this thing is if we go into Windows and we type in controller, set up USB game controllers. It recognizes that we have an Xbox One controller plugged into it, so we're going to double click on that, and this is what's going to pop up. So now if I press one of the big buttons, button 1 and 2 is going to light up, and if I move my joystick, the XY axis should move around, and it does. So that gives you a little bit more fidelity. You can see more about what your joystick is doing instead of the generic up, down, left, right that we saw earlier. So there you go. Still looks like it's working pretty well. Of course, this is just one way that you could build a joystick. You certainly can use your own methods of putting one of these joysticks inside of a box. Some ways that you might be able to save some money if every dollar counts, and I understand that sometimes that is the case. Here are some tips that you could take to cut some money out of this. So one thing you could do is you could take your cable, your TRRS cable, and cut it in half. So you would take the cable like so, and then cut it in half here. And you could take the end that you cut and you could strip the insulation off of it, and what you're going to find is there's 4 wires inside of it. And then you could wire up those 4 wires directly to the joystick. So on the joystick side, you would cut this connector off, and then you could wire the 4 wires that are on your cable to the 4 wires that are on the joystick. If you did it that way, you could avoid buying the 3.5mm jack and also the adapter cable that's on the inside that we wired the 3.5mm jack to. Now, it's not as nice. One of the benefits to doing it like we did in this video is if you ever had a problem with the joystick for whatever reason and you needed to swap it out with a different one, you can just disconnect this joystick, unplug it from the adapter cable that we used, throw another joystick in there, and plug it directly in. If you did it the cheaper way, where you cut the cable in half, in order to replace that joystick, you're going to have to deconnect your wires from the joystick directly. So there's pros and cons to everything. You can also, of course, make your own box instead of buying one. If you had scrap materials laying around, you could certainly do that. So you could get by with buying minimum materials if that's important to you. I think that's going to do it for this episode. I'm pretty happy with the way this turned out, and I'll keep playing with this and see if it lasts the long run. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you've got other joysticks that you've used in the systems. Maybe it'll help us. Maybe it'll help somebody else out there. So drop me a comment. I love to get emails. I'm also going to put a link down on Facebook if you want to check out the videos on Facebook and have a discussion there. I welcome that as well. So thanks for watching. Hopefully you found something in this video useful. If you did, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.